Right. What it is, what it do, what's happening. Everybody out there in the wide world, welcome back to the Inner Storyteller. Welcome back to your real life. Welcome back to me fiddling with chords and things. Um, my cell phone telling me that I'm live on YouTube. Welcome back to all of the great things that brought you here in the first place. And if you are here, please consider liking the video. It would greatly aid my ambition to one day monetize this channel. Um, Manufactured Mentality is a series on this playlist on this podcast and it's a playlist on YouTube. And this is part two, so there's only one other video in this playlist so far. But the Manufactured Mentality playlist within this podcast, mini series within this podcast, is the series that I'm dedicating to be the backbone of, sort of the social aspects of this philosophy, the inner storyteller. The backbone of the social, not the whole thing, not the backbone of the whole thing. The backbone of the whole thing is what is the inner storyteller and how does it work, right? The question that we ask here is what can actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works. So that's the core of the entire podcast. But the core of the manufactured mentality series, or excuse me, the manufactured mentality mini series is the core of the social aspect of this work here. And I wanted to say that off the bat so that you knew how important this information is to me that I'm getting ready to share with you in this episode and when we come back for part three, which will be a deep dive into moral relativism. Okay, it's moral relativism is a branch off of solipsism. It branches off very beautifully, and we're going to get into all of that juicy information about how your mind works, right? Not just how to help yourself or how to get rich fast and get rid of limiting beliefs so you can get rich fast. Not any of that. Okay, we're not going to play that game on this channel. Unfortunately, we are going to really understand the mind. We're going to really understand who we are, what our real potential and capacities are, and ability and latent abilities, maybe potential abilities you could say, are. And we're going to explore how we can align with natural law to achieve our shared objectives like more freedom, less coercion, less corruption, more health, less disease, less illness, less sickness, less poison, right? Or less deliberate poisoning. Our shared objectives, the ones that far too much of the population has, even though there are some rare ones that do not share these objectives, but the ones that pretty much everybody shares in the whole world. To achieve those objectives, we must achieve the prerequisites leading up to those grandiose orders and learning yourself, knowing yourself through and through to the point where you're so aware of yourself that you can deliberately change and upgrade yourself um slowly, at like kind of one step at a time. Life is not just going to let you just dimension hop into a new person, but you can when you are hyper aware of how the mind works, then and you practice being still so that you can be very kind of grounded in the present moment. When shit hits the fan, then you have gifted yourself the ability to change on a dime. to be. I don't mean be a new person, like take on a character. I mean just to sort of upgrade your automatic responses um, through doing the work that's necessary to do that to the stimuli of life. Okay, so if you're here, you're here for real conversations, good people. We talk about natural law, we talk about religion, we talk about money, anarchy, we talk about culture, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great. And we talk about how mankind is manipulated by forces that don't have our best interests at heart, perhaps because they are completely evil. And we are examining the psychological affects and effects of the stories we have the most faith in, ones we have the most stake in. And that examination has to sit right alongside an honest look at the current human condition, which is enslavement or slavery. Government is slavery, good people. And the question that we have to keep coming back to is what can actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works. Okay? So, let me get the picture for you guys. One time for the one time and the one time. Pow. Manufactured mentality part 2. Okay, let me make this bigger so I can actually see. We got words create reality, stories create control. Their wars, their agenda, your sacrifice. History is written by the winners. America first? Who does it really serve? Those who control the language control the thoughts, to George Orwell. Nation, interest, enemy, war, sacrifice, glory, freedom, society, we. Propaganda, information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote a political cause or point of view. In God, we. I love it. That is your AI created thumbnail for the day. But it also, what I do sometimes is I'll give it the whole script, and I'll say, use various things for inspiration out of this text. And it's a very accurate thumbnail for today's content. Buckle up, buckle up. Um, I just thought of a clip from Coach Collins' his show today. He went live earlier today. He's live, I think, Monday through Thursday, every morning. And I'm at work listening to him, and he's playing this clip from Graham Allen's show. Graham Allen is a shill for the Tiny Hatland, um, who has dedicated over like 300 or 400 some crazy number of posts dissing Candace Owens for looking into the investigation of what happened to Charlie Kirk or whatever. Graham Allen, in the beginning of one of his episodes, says, "Buckle up your buttholes." We're- you know, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Anyway, buckle in, okay? Buckle your seatbelts, um, because we got a wild ride for today's show. Quick reminder of where we've been, where we went in part 1. We established that solipsism, solipsism is the root of all manufactured thought in a way. Okay, it's the foundational position that only your mind is sure to exist, and therefore, um, every other existence is not confirmable to be real. Like nothing is actually real. Therefore, truth can really not be known. Therefore, those who are out here being passionate, sharing truth, and trying to get people to maybe upgrade the way that they behave so that we can achieve our shared objectives are actually the problem because they're pushing a worldview that's not, you know, accurate, and they can't even know the truth even if they think they know the truth. That sort of thinking. Okay, with which once that's running in your inner storyteller, or in the collective inner storyteller. That makes every other corruption of thinking available. It's a foundational thing. Okay, fundamental. And we talked about how the dark occult, the order giver class, the elites, or what have you, they deliberately push solipsism through every system of knowledge available to us, right? Every system of knowledge put together that's designed to promote liberation is littered with solipsistic thoughts, you know, because a population, this is why they do it, a population that has rejected conventional morality but hasn't found a deeper moral structure underneath it is actually more manageable, more enslavable than one that never woke up at all. That population has a philosophical permission structure for following the flesh wherever it leads and calling that freedom. Today, I want to show you one of the specific places solipsism gets delivered, and it's not just through philosophy, okay? It's not just through entertainment, it's not just through occult traditions. It's through something that feels completely neutral. And y'all probably know what I'm getting at. History. The way that history, the diction that's used when they word and they put the language in how history is taught and how thereby history is thought about by those who grew up with all of the people, all of the authors writing in this way, all of the things. We'll get into what I'm talking about in specific, but all of the authors writing in the same kind of way of all of the mainstream kind of government school and government funded post school educational institutions talk about history in this way. Let's get into it. Very, very important. Very, very important that we see the magic trick. If we don't see the magic trick, it's going to continue to work. Okay. But if we do see the magic trick, it loses its grip on your mind in a way. Let me give you a sentence. Let me start this off with an example. A sentence you've probably heard some version of in a classroom, a documentary, or a book. The sentence is: before World War One, Europe was a continent full of tensions that were ready to explode. Now, that sentence is accurate about a very, very small percentage of the people who were actually living in Europe in the early 1900s and late 1800s. The kings, the generals, the financial interests, the governmental administrators, the military strategists, and military personnel in general who were positioned for territory and resource dominance. Those people, the so called governing body and the financial class, which is always obviously tied to and regulated by the governing body and influencing what gets written into the regulation. The so called governing body class, they were full of tensions ready to explode. In fact, they did explode. World War One happened, millions lost their lives. And then World War Two happened not too long after. The regular person, though, the majority of people alive in Europe, and when I say majority, I mean the 90%. Okay, I don't know exactly what the percentage of military personnel for every single country was back then, but let's just ballpark it 85, 90 to 92% or so of people. Okay, not some 50%, 51% majority. No, the real, actual, everybody else up there in Europe. The the farmer in Bavaria. What was he doing? Well, he's probably farming. He's probably taking care of his woman, right? The woman in France raising her children, what was she doing? She's probably going to church or something, socializing, going out drinking. I don't know. The laborer in what's another in England. What was he doing? Well, he's probably laboring. He's probably going to work every day. Were these people holding tensions for Russia, outside of reading the news or something and having a feeling for, I don't know, 15 minutes? Were they holding tensions? These people were not worried about whether their country would be able to expand its borders. They were not participating in the planning of the unfolding agenda of those who were governmentally and financially, first of all, literate, but also interested. In fact, most people in any country, at any time, in anywhere in history that you look, most people were not financially literate or literate about the real deep rules of government and how those rules work, and or the rules of procedure for their like parliament or court system or whatever. And that's why they have to rely on the bar cards, the the uh the system itself. They have to rely on personnel from the system itself, specialists, as navigators of the legal and financial systems, which which are the priest class of any generation, of anywhere in history. The hidden priest class of the religion of monetary value, which also gives birth to the religion of man's authority. Most people could not understand deep governmental rules, deep governmental information, or financial information of any kind, except for, what it costs to live their lives. But that sentence, Europe was a continent full of tensions. It says Europe. Doesn't say the very small percentage of the population of Europe which would make up the governing and top brass of the financial class, right? It says Europe, the whole continent, all its people collapsed into one subject with one set of feelings and one set of ambitions in regard to other countries. That's how the party line is delivered every time, every textbook, every story. This is not a casual error. This is the solipsism problem operating at a collective level. Remember, remember what solipsism does at the individual level. It tells the person that only their experience is real, that the experiences of others are less certain, less important, therefore less morally binding to pay attention to, less a part of life than one's self. The order giver class distributes this at the individual level to produce a population that can feel that cannot properly feel the weight of what these systems do to other people, especially if there's distance involved with those other people. But solipsism also has a collective expression. When the language of history consistently collapses the distinction between the governmental class and the civilian population into one word, like saying Europe, America, Germany, Africa, right? What gets produced is a collective solipsistic framework for the thoughts that come after. The nation becomes the self that they're talking about. The nation's ambitions become the self's ambitions. The nation's enemies become the self's enemies. The nation's wars become the self's wars. And that self is blanket attributed to all the people within that, even if we also learn in reading about or hearing about, if it's in the same story, that there were dissenting voices. We still take in the information that Europe was full of tensions, that France and Germany hated each other, or whatever, right? That it's the people within the, like, that blanket, everybody's in it. And history is written like this throughout all time. There's something very intentional in my observation about how certain things are taught. And I mostly mean in schools. I'm not necessarily talking about authors that wrote books that maybe got, a lot of recognition by other historians for doing great work in their like personal books. I mostly mean like the stories that we get that make it to the textbooks. Okay. Um, so even private books that tell those stories, but not necessarily like the rare real historian that does, real good work and, can verify everything 5 times over, 6 times over, whatever. Not necessarily that person's books. Okay. But the doctrine books. The farmer in Bavaria did not have a war to fight. He had a farm to take care of. He had children. He had a life, right? It was not in any meaningful conflict with France. The conflict belonged to the governing class. It belonged to the sorcerers, the mind controllers. Once the language of history has trained the inner storyteller of every person who received it to experience that conflict as their own conflict, as the self's conflict. And once that identification is installed, once the citizen and the state have been filed into the same drawer, something very specific becomes possible in the realm of how that person can be controlled, how their mentality can be manufactured favorably to you at their detriment. I'm telling you, we got a crazy ride to go on. I just want to make certain things clear. Sometimes you might have to watch an episode twice. Keep up, cause just stay with me, y'all. So this is what becomes possible. The governing class can use the language of civilian interest to justify its own agenda. It can say we, meaning the nation, meaning the people, have interests that require this policy, this war, this tax increase, this sacrifice, this invasion of your privacy, this stripping down of your rights, this stripping down of your recognition as a whole human for the greater good. And the inner storyteller already trained itself to identify with the state, meaning, oh, if it's in the state's best interest, it's in my best interest. This is the manufactured mentality under all statism. Okay? The story that since history is told in such a way that it kind of leads to a very natural, very easy to slip into self-identification with one's own nation and with conflicts that affect one's nation, even if it's between two nations that didn't directly put boots on the ground near you, right? This is the manufactured mentality under all of the statism. Not enforced through explicit indoctrination primarily, but delivered through the casual, unremarkable, totally normalized use of language. America did this. Europe decided to do that. Germany did this other thing. Russia did this other thing in response. That language erases the distinction between the small group of people making these brass decisions, especially the order giver class that would never actually go to war, would never actually go face fears that greatly and train to be qualified to even face the fear. They would never do this, especially those people. The historian accidentally sometimes and deliberately in other times uses it looking backwards, uses that language looking backwards. The politician uses it looking forward. Okay, we're getting ready to get into the America First linguistics. Okay, it's the same function. It's the same collapse of reality into something false. It's the same manufactured mentality. And no, I don't mean that what's in the hearts of people that say, even politicians and whatnot, that say, oh, Thomas Massey and him, I'm America first. Tucker Carlson, I'm America first. I'm America. Uh, some people say I'm America only or whatever. That everything in those people's hearts is evil or some shit. No, 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 no. America First as an ideology is built on a false foundation that I think most people don't really understand. That's what I'm getting at. Okay. So, cool stuff for the podcast world. 2 days ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene posted a photograph from Tucker Carlson's home in Maine. And around the table were Marjorie Taylor Greene and her husband, obviously Tucker Carlson, Thomas Massey, and Joe Kent. And the caption read, "We said no more foreign wars, and we meant it, and supported Donald Trump because he made that promise. But he's betrayed us all. Our commitment is America first for all Americans, right, left, and center. The movement has begun." And then music started playing. Mm, 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 mm. You don't even know. It was cool. It was a cool little moment. Cool little moment. Now, some of the genuine grievances in that are very real, obviously. No more foreign wars. No more more wars, period. Full stop. Is an actual civilian shared objective. A civilian interest stated correctly, right? The Einstein files. You know what I'm saying? The island boy, Mr. Jeff. That the push for that file release, which cost, Massey and Marjorie a lot in their career. Um that's a real civilian interest. It was a real accountability demand, at least the very beginnings of one. It was the real beginnings of it was, or excuse me, it was the beginnings of a real accountability demand from the government, right? Now, obviously, we fast forward to today, and nobody's. Well, if I guess if Miss Maxwell is locked up somewhere, which I don't even believe that's true, but that's just me. I don't, I'm very conspiratorial minded. I don't know. I can't see her with my own eyes in a cell. Um, but besides her, not really anybody has been held accountable. And obviously, there's still what they say, like it's three some odd million more files, right? None of the videos are out. Um, so some of the grievances in the caption and in these people, when they show up on interviews and they talk about this stuff, are very real concerns for the civilian population, the 99%, right? But here's the question. The inner storyteller framework wants to ask this question: what specific structural changes are actually being proposed? Because America First for all Americans, right, left, and center, is not a structural proposal. That's a catchphrase. It's a phrase that does exactly what Europe was full of tensions does to the mind. America First. It collapses the distinction between the governing class and the civilian population into one subject with one set of interests, right? Quote unquote, America, which should include me. But I don't agree with any of those people. Obviously, I'm an abolitionist and an anarchist, so I don't believe in slavery. I don't believe 48 times the charm, personally. It's just not my belief system, right? Can't point to the founding fathers. They were slavers. It doesn't make sense to point to them. They also created this centralized power structure. Um, you can't point to anybody after the founding fathers up to 1865. Lincoln or whatever. And then when you look at Lincoln and you look at him with deep scrutiny, you find that scholars disagree on his reasoning for doing what would again be the first step of addressing slavery, but instead converted it into now everybody is just a wage slave. We're going to start that game. The game of slavery is going to change form in in what may be the grand plan of super communism, one world government they that secret societies have been writing about and publishing publicly for decades, maybe centuries, actually. But they use this terminology, America first, right? As if the farmer in Ohio, okay, the barber in Wilmington, Delaware, and the person running the weapons contract connected with the IDF, the IDF, um, right, or the senator who's been a senator for 40 years, never worked a regular job ever, um, is in the same relationship to whatever comes first in these people's minds. First implies a ranking system of some kind, a competition, a winner and a loser, maybe, right? Which means the phrase is already operating within a frame that seems to accept the premise that nations are in competition with each other and the world is a finite game with winners and losers. Okay, that's basic game theory. And the job of the government is to make sure that your nation wins or is winning in the perpetual sort of thing, in the never ending race. If your nation is winning, your government's doing its job, right? Now, for us, militarily, we're holding on. I think we happen to be winning in a lot of sense, a lot of certain things, military might, military force, not necessarily military strategy. I think we're pretty dumb in that category, but we're winning in certain ways militarily. But the people, oh, we got to be the dumbest kids ever. Americans are behind in everything that matters. And this is before we even mention that all of our food and all of our water and all of our air and all of our gas is poison to high hell, right? The farmer in Ohio is not in competition with the maid in Ukraine. Their actual interests, the farmer has interests in good soil, freedom to use to like collect rainwater, um, God's grace and some fair weather, healthy children, maybe, right? The maid in Ukraine, good tools to use, healthy work environment and schedule, um, peace, right? Their actual interests are identical, pretty much, regardless of which flag is planted in the ground where they happen to have been born. And the vehicle being organized around this is called a third party, right? That's what it's called. It's called a third. There's already more than three parties, but it's called a third party or another party. Another set of people asking for the population's energy, loyalty, trust, right, and time. Asking for these things to operate the same apparatus that at current is taxing us at damn near 50%, which is not even close to the biggest issue that we have, but it's a huge issue for what it feels like to be alive in 2026 if you're not, very well off and without children. The same religion of man's authority wearing a different name with some different style on the name tag, but with the same title on the name tag. Just a different font. Does not change anything about the actual nature of government itself. Government is slavery because there's no such real thing as a man's authority over his peers. You can't just put a different head on the same body and pretend, pretend like there's been a real structural change to the body. I should have said face. You can't just put a new face on the same body and pretend that there's been a real structural change to the body. Do you know how much money it would take for what was that, like six people to actually structurally change this machine by themselves without basically the entire country or maybe even the world turning its back on the current system, with that, like with us not doing that and us just kind of being mundane and saying, okay, please do what, do it for us, thank you, we're just going to keep going to work and act like nothing's happening, we're just going to keep going to school, we're just going to keep, overpaying for everything and act like nothing's happening, do it for us, thank you. If that's our do you know how much money, time, effort, and like how good of a strategist and dodge, like how good you are at dodging bullets and whatnot, that you would have to be for a group of only that many people to really structurally change this beast, the numbers are unimaginable. Okay, lots and lots of commas. That's that's how much money and that's how much time. Commas, people. Commas in the number. Now, the inner storyteller of the person who feels genuinely betrayed by a president like Donald Trump will file the new movement into the new someone who has finally started speaking for the us in the us versus them, or in that betrayal. The sorting function in the inner storyteller. Talk about the inner storyteller is this sort of layer of consciousness, right? It's not a personal feeling. It's not something you develop. It's something that's a part of how consciousness is, how consciousness is in this world, how it's built, I guess. It didn't feel right to say the word built, but how it operates. And within the inner storyteller, you do have a something that develops, which is called the sorting function. And the sorting function can, has direct influence over your associations. Okay, a definition associated with the word, a word associated with a story associated with feelings, or you know information. Those that associate, it gets sorted. And what I say on this channel is, you sort a thought, or you sort an event, or you sort a story into a drawer, and that drawer is like a category of how you interpret these things to be. So the sorting function responds to the civilian interest being named. It doesn't automatically examine who is naming it, what structural dismantling they are proposing, or what their relationship to the existing apparatus already is. It doesn't look at the important questions. And this is the solipsism uh, distribution mechanism operating through political language. And I'm not saying that Tucker and Joe Kent and Marjorie Taylor Greene are out here promoting solipsism from some secret dark occult thing. No, I'm saying that we are so cooked as a people that those that do everything quote unquote right to change the system are going to mentally be serving Satan. They will be mentally serving the enemy of even themselves, unless they really have um, dug deep within themselves and acknowledged that it's not possible to have actual real authority over my peers. Government is thereby and therefore slavery, as it enforces its rules under threat of violence, even if you just happen to be born there. You didn't ask to be born there. You were completely innocent in the entire ordeal. And by the time you're old enough to be held accountable for following their rules, i.e., like 2 to 3 years old, um, ignorance of the law is not an excuse for breaking their arbitrary rules. On top of this whole money thing, and money's not real from the jump. It's just a game. It's just, I want to balance the books type of game. When in real life, an apple means the world to somebody who's extremely hungry and likes apples, in comparison to somebody who's extremely well fed all the time and doesn't like apples. But this money game is like, yeah, but it's $3.99 for to both of those people. It's like it could cost billions of dollars to the hungry person that likes apples, and they'll buy it if they have it. If they got it like that, it's worth a lot more in the moment. The nature does not It's not transactional in that way. Nature just gives and replenishes and gives and replenishes. Anyway, got offhand a little bit there, but we gotta keep all these things in mind, right? We gotta keep all these things in mind. So here we go. We have been here almost 48 times. The purported values of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and even some of the Federalist Papers have been invoked and reinvoked and promised and betrayed across an entire history of a nation, pardon me, called America. I didn't mean to burp in y'all ears like that. That's my bad. I didn't expect it to just sneak up on me like that. It pounced. It pounced on my lungs. Um, the principles laid out in our founding documents, the principles that Christ taught in this so-called Christian nation or supposed, you know, nation built by Bible-believing Christians. I don't think so, but that's what they say. The bet that the next set of people will somehow be better at honoring better at honoring these principles than the previous ones. It's not a very good bet. Okay, 48 times the charm is not necessarily good odds in a game where every round is at least 4 years. Okay, it's not good odds for the person making the bet. Oh, 48 times the charm. It's gotta work this time. The manufactured mentality that mommy money and daddy government can be held responsible for your state of living and um, care about your state of living at all, and that the most you can do is just vote in better parents. That mentality is the manufactured mentality this whole series is trying to dismantle. Okay? Now, you may not remember if you're in America, you probably don't remember that in September of 2025, we're not talking about Charlie Kirk on this one. In September of 2025, Nepal toppled its own government in 36 hours. And they don't have Second Amendment protections that I know of. They didn't organize a third party and say we're gonna elect these new parents. No, they didn't select. They didn't choose from a lineup of better candidates through the existing system. They didn't just hope that the governing body would upgrade itself from the inside out. No, they withdrew their participation in the game and they did so at real cost. Okay, 74 people died, which is not good. It's not good. Okay, over 2,000 were injured. The prime minister resigned. Government buildings were burned. And the movement didn't even have a leader. It had no party platform, no detailed blueprint for what exactly comes next. Pretty sure they used Discord to select their next um, attempt, their next kind of structural attempt at any kind of leadership. What's precise for today's episode, is what those in Nepal didn't necessarily have. Okay, and I just alluded to this earlier. They didn't have the framework of the inner storyteller. They didn't have a fully articulated philosophy of the religion of monetary value or the religion of man's authority. At least not, in the form of like this podcast, my book, or any kind of single body of thing that really explained it to them and it was mainstream distributed. They didn't have anything like that. They didn't have a coherent alternative economic model, apparently, and they didn't have the language of the sorting function and the manufactured mentalities that the collective inner storyteller are influenced by. What they had was still enough. They had the recognition, right? The recognition arrived at through lived experience rather than just philosophy. That system was producing outcomes that were intolerable, and the collective courage to say no and mean it with their bodies was delivered in response. In a country where they don't have Second Amendment protections that I know of, in a country where the army imposed a nationwide curfew to stop them, and they kept going anyway. They didn't say Nepal first, Nepal only, that I know of. They didn't form a third party. They said, yo, enough. Enough. Shut it down. Shut it down. No. No. Not listening to you. That's what they said. Some of them said, ugh, hi, God. And that really sucks. That's bad. That's a bad thing that happened. But it did happen. It is true. Okay. And they toppled their governing body in 36 hours because they said enough is enough and demonstrated the consequence of making your whole population choose to do that. Their uprising followed the youth led toppling of governments in Sri Lanka in 2022, Bangladesh in 2024, just a year prior, a wave moving across South Asia of populations who used history to study morality rather than just using morality to study history, who looked at what the system was producing and concluded that this is what the system does. This is not just a fluke. This is not just bad leaders. This is the system. Our suffering is the system. Enough. The language of their history may one day say that Nepal was full of tensions, right? And it will collapse their lives and their courage and their genuine human no into a single word that serves whoever is writing the sentence. And that's how the cycle may continue. But the act itself, the withdrawal from compliance with real cost, that act was real. That could not have come from a solipsistic mindset. It was the opposite of solipsism. It was a population feeling the weight of of what the system was doing to people outside of just themselves and deciding that that weight obligated them to do something about it. Okay? Italy has been running a sustained wave of general strikes and mass protests since September 25, and that's still ongoing today. Over 1 million people demonstrated in Rome in October 2025, and dock workers refused to load weapons shipments, not as policy, right? Not as something coordinated by party leaders in any rank and file system. No, people saying no with their labor at the point of actual consequence. They didn't petition the government, they didn't petition their boss. They said no in the moment. They didn't just reform the government from the inside out or form a third party. They refused to do the specific thing that they were being asked to do because they identified it as wrong. The Italian movement also illustrates something important about the managed form of no. There is a way that you say no and you think is coming from you, but it's actually manufactured. And then there's a way to say no because you're aware and you're present and you're deciding that this is the story that you want to live by, that you want to live. So the Italian movement also illustrates something important about the managed form of no. You got union bureaucracies. Bureaucracies. Union bureaucracies attempted to absorb the energy of the radical base unions, calling their own strikes, timed to dissipate momentum, limiting demands to modest changes to the budget, and diverting anger into channels that do not really threaten a system's foundation. The third party, America First, America Only, or whatever, is also a managed form of no. Now, the dock workers who refused to load the weapons was a genuine form of no. No, we're not going to physically do this thing. We're no longer doing what the system wrote down as the procedure when the order is given. The managed form feels like action. It generates energy, courage, momentum, and belonging, and it leaves the load bearing structure intact because the people managing it are themselves inside that structure and dependent on its continuation, not necessarily its controllers, but somewhere in the structure itself. And thereby, through the religion of monetary value, they believe that their survival, that human beings' well being, or maybe their countrymen's well being, is dependent on that system continuing as is, status quo. Nepal and Italy did not necessarily need the inner storyteller framework to act. Okay. And Italy's little movements did not get wholly swallowed by the mainstream, although there is some of that going on. And I'm not an expert in exactly what's happening, so I will not discuss specifics today. But what they did have was the fruit test. You know, they looked at morality and they looked over history, looked back at morality, like, wait a minute, I can see a pattern here. If we are collectively following orders that are similar to these types of orders, we are getting these fruits. Oh, we got to stop this. And they did so. What the framework adds is the why underneath the what, right? Not just that the game is wrong, which is enough to act, but why it keeps regenerating itself even after the people do really say no in genuine ways. Why the third party fills the space where the previous betrayal was, why the union bureaucracy absorbs the radical strikes and replaces it with managed strikes. Why the farmer in Bavaria in 1913 found himself conscripted into a war between governing classes he had no part in planning. Why Europe was full of tensions that were ready to explode sounds like it's about the people when it's really never, ever, ever been about the people. Not once. And why solipsism is the specific manufactured mentality being distributed through all of it. Because a population that has been trained to experience the nation as an extension of themselves, to feel the nation's ambitions as their own ambitions, I should say, to feel the government's ambitions as their own ambitions, the government's enemies as their own enemies, the government's leadership as their own representation, that population is running a solipsism train of thought collectively. A solipsistic story lives in their collective inner storyteller. The governing class is the only real self. Everyone else is just a supporting character in the story of our great nation. The history, language installs the mentality, and the nationalism language activates some of the mentality, the people, the activates the people to be activists under the ideology. And the third party movement, is like the manifested one of the manifested fruits. We'll see where this movement goes, by the way, and I'm not dissing any of these people personally. In part one, we established that a manufactured mentality is not just conditioning. It is the result of deliberate installation of by people who understand exactly what the stories they're distributing will produce and who can benefit from that production. The language of history that collapses citizen and state and civilian into one subject, America, is a manufactured mentality. So the America First language that uses the civilian interest as fuel for a governing class is a manufactured mentality. That's all there is to it. All three keep the examination aimed at the branches rather than the root. All three produce another cycle of hope, betrayal, and managed opposition to the religion of monetary value and the religion of man's authority. The work of this series is the root of what we should be paying attention to, not just a branch, not a third party of better leaders. The examination of the story that made you experience the other class's war as your war, another class's first as your first, another class's game as the only available game. You know, on a personal note, one of my pet peeves is multitasking. People that call themselves multitasking, they think they're multitasking. Specifically, watching someone I know very well and love very much try to do two things at once and do those two things badly when, since I know them, I know they would have done either way better alone. It's a pet peeve of mine. I instantly get frustrated, right? And I know I instantly get frustrated. And I know it comes from a belief, a story that I carry in my inner storyteller, right? I tell myself, whenever it's possible, we should give our full attention to whatever thing that we're actually doing in the moment. And obviously, multitaskers are trying to do that with two things at once, and it's not possible. Now, that belief, we should give our full attention to what we're doing, is mine. It's my belief. I didn't necessarily manufacture it, but it's something that I genuinely think produces better fruits, better outcomes, better results, and better presence and better relationship than trying to multitask. But that belief also lives in a drawer marked as how the world should work. I see that I get frustrated because my belief is the world should work this way. And when the world doesn't work that way, when the person I'm watching is doing, what makes sense to them, but the thing that gets on my nerves, my reaction comes from that drawer. The world should be working the way I like it, right? Now, the honest move is to recognize that, not necessarily to abandon the belief. Again, I genuinely think if most people lived by the principle of giving your full attention to what you're doing, that the world would be a more easily navigable place. So you don't just abandon the belief out of full stop, necessarily. You don't just pretend multitasking is fine either, but you move from you move the experience as much as you can at any given time from the drawer that says this is how the world should work into the drawer that says I wish the world was this way, but how do I show up as my best self, right? Because those two drawers produce different responses in the same moment. First produces frustration aimed outward at somebody else. The second produces a question aimed inward. Given what I'm seeing, what's happening, how am I to show up as my best self? And I say all of that because I think that our collective stubborn points, our shared patterns of annoyance, our cultural pet peeves, if you will, they come from stories filed in the how the world should work drawer that haven't really been examined for what they actually are, right? They haven't been scrutinized for are they actually true? Are they actually useful? Are they actually producing the results that we want to produce with our behavior patterns? And the story of government, as it's told and as it's understood, the story that a class of people has a legitimate authority over all of their peers, and that a government's ambitions are your ambitions, and a government's enemies are your enemies, right? The solution that the solution to um, governance, the problem of governance, is just better governance. That story is the most heavily manipulated story in the history of manipulated stories. And it's been filed into the how the world should work drawer of more human beings across more generations than any other story that has ever been deliberately distributed by evil people. So, moving it doesn't mean the world becomes easy. Moving it meaning taking it out of the drawer of this is how the world should work, putting it into this is how the world does work. How do I show up as my best self drawer? Moving it doesn't mean that the world becomes easy. It doesn't mean that the problems disappear. It means that you stop spending your energy reacting to the manipulation and start asking, given that this is what's actually happening, what's the most useful version of me? What's the best version of me available right now? What story in this moment am I willing to live? What story are you willing to live? Good people, let me know in the comments because I just got to know certain things. I just got to know all the things. Okay? Um so very excited. So very excited. Tomorrow we got Sarah Cross coming back. Spill some more tea. We're going to get into some deep topics that still touch the medical industry but also look a little deeper at the human mind. So I'm stoked for that conversation. Sorry for going over an hour, but I know y'all, some of y'all like me enough that it's not gonna make you mad. And I will see you all tomorrow with a set across. Peace and love always in all ways, baby.